I'm Stuart Lloyd. I'm a member of the Ballymena Church Members Forum, a body which seeks to bring together people and seeks, especially from different faith perspectives, and to perhaps build a more cohesive society. And when I heard of this project, looking back, looking forward, I thought, well, the forum should be involved in that. And because I have an interest in Irish history, I was drawn in. And I was particularly interested to find out a little bit more about a former rector in Ballymena, because I'd been rector there for 27 years. And back in 1921, the rector was the Reverend John Cullen. So I did a little bit of research about him, and I was intrigued to find that before coming to Ballymena, he'd been a missionary in India for 26 years. And I myself have a mission partnership with India over a period of 30 years and have been to India many times. So this was something we shared together. But also he served with the Church Missionary Society, and my own father was organizing secretary of that body for many years. So in a sense, we shared quite a bit. I have researched the church records of St. Patrick's Ballymena before, and I'm aware that very often they're very parochial and they don't refer to political matters or matters going on out in the world. And I wondered, was that the same in 1921? And at first sight, it did seem to be. There was things about, boilers breaking down and the numbers attending services and confirmation candidates and so forth. But then I came across a report in the Ballymena Weekly Telegraph of the 9th of April, and I found it fascinating because at the beginning of this, a vote of condolence was passed to the curate, the Reverend J.P. Cotter, on the death of his brother. How had he died? He'd been assassinated by the IRA in County Cork. So clearly the troubled state of the country in some way impinged upon the parish. But also at such events, the rector gives a report, and normally, again, it's very parochial. But not in this case in 1921, because so much of the report was given over to the troubled state of the country and the political situation. And the rector was very forthright in his views and giving expression to those. And it was very clear the cause that he espoused. And indeed, it was clear how he was going to vote in forthcoming elections and how he expected the parishioners to vote. So, although looking at the records, it might have appeared that the church was, in a sense, quite removed at what was going on in the country, the reality was that, in fact, the state of the country did impinge upon the parish and upon parishioners. And today, surely even more so, I reckon that the church should very much be involved in the public square, because it certainly has a vital contribution to make there.
My name is Roberta, and Jackie and I are the Grace Hill Moravian Church archivists, and we're sitting here just in front of the archives. We were asked to research the events in the life of the church in 1921, and our interest really deepened as the time went on. We were struck by the fact there wasn't much political comment on the situation at the time, and that things were just going on as normal.
According to the Grace Hill Diaries, two sad events happened in August of that year, with the deaths of two young boys aged 13 and 12. One was killed at his own front door instantaneously, having ridden his bike into a trap. The other was drowned in the River Main when he was out swimming. Apart from these sad stories, life in Grace Hill went on pretty much as usual. Buildings, including the church, were painted, paths were cleared, the burial ground was tidied up, fences were erected, and in the village square, a fair was held to raise funds for the erection of a new belfry, and also for the erection of a memorial in the church to those members of the Moravian Church who had served in the First World War.
In January 1921, plans were made for this memorial. It was to be made of brass and mounted on black marble. It was to contain all the names of those who had lost their lives or who had taken part in the First World War. One thing unusual about it is the fact that it recorded the women's names as well as the men's. And that was unusual for that time. It was unveiled on the 29th of May 1921 by Mrs. Rogers. The diary records that 275 people were present. It was a cold and showery day, and the offering was £5.13 and sixpence.
The only mention in the Gracehill diaries of any trouble in the area concerning partition was the fact that a trip by the Moravian congregation here to Belfast Moravian churches was called off because of the disturbed state in the city. The Belfast Moravian Church members had to make detours to actually get to their church services, and in Dublin it was decided by the Moravian Church to hold its weekly evening meetings in the House of Members because again of the disturbed state of the city. And in 1922 the Moravian Church was actually closed because of the fierce fighting around it.
In his recollections, James Mitchell, who was a member of the Gracehill Moravian Church and a local school teacher, he records it like this. In 1920, Ulster got the right of self-government, and immediately opposition arose to render such government impossible. Incendiary fires broke out in all directions over Ulster, and bridges were blown up so that Ulster people had a time of trial. But this was overcome by the exercise of patience and perseverance.
I'm Jennifer McLernan, and I'm a member of Ballymena Church Members Forum, and we decided to look at what was going on in church life in Ballymena in 1921, and maybe have a bit of a comparison of what it was like today. Generally, in 1921, there certainly were reports or accounts of goodwill and cooperation between the denominations. One particular example that we found was a meeting of a protection committee, which was called by the Urban Council. It was attended by a public meeting attended by all the ratepayers in the town. And at that meeting, the parish priest spoke out about the goodwill and the good relations among people of, as he put it, all creeds and classes in Ballymena. He was doing that in his when he was seconding a proposal that had been put by one of the Presbyterian ministers in the town about the formation of this committee, and that resolution was carried, according to the press report, with applause from the large group of people that were there. There was an example. We certainly found an example of sectarianism. The parish hall belonging to the main Catholic church in the town was burnt round about that same time. Now, I then particularly focused on West Church, which was one of the Presbyterian churches in the town, had been there since the mid-19th century. Or early 19th century, in fact. And I think it was one of five Presbyterian churches in the town. Today there's actually 8 Presbyterian churches in the town. But looking at that, a lot of things were very similar to what they are today. I mean, there was Sunday worship, 2 services on a Sunday, morning and evening. There were kirk session meetings, committee meetings. There was all sorts of organisations and activities, very similar to what there is today. But there were some differences. For example, there was a temperance group called the Band of Hope, and its role was very much to encourage or discourage the use of alcoholic liquor as a beverage. For the first time in the church's history, a woman was elected to the church committee, which was the committee that oversaw sort of the non-spiritual life of the church. She was proposed by one of the men and was brought onto the committee, so that was a first. There was a town deaconess who actually worked among the the 5 Presbyterian churches in the town. Now, she was one of the first deaconesses ordained in the Presbyterian Church in Ireland in the early part of the 20th century. One other little incident or situation which definitely is very different today was the pipe organ. There was an 183 pipe organ. Now, it depended on its operation on a water supply, which drove the mechanism that made the organ work. Now, that water supply was allowed or by the Urban Council, the Urban District Council, and they allowed it free for worship services in the church. But when the organist wanted to give private tuition to anybody, which he could do with the agreement of the kirk session, the water had to be paid for. There was other things that again are in maybe some ways similar today. For example, there was congregational members who certainly held roles, significant roles within the congregation. The clerk of session at the time was also the superintendent of the Sabbath school, as it would have been called. And he was the principal of Ballymena Technical College at the time. There was also, in those days, a number of afternoon Sabbath schools that would have been run in the town. Now, those were open to people of well, they probably were aimed at people of no faith or no denomination. And they wouldn't have just been for children. Older people could have gone to those as well too. And West Church congregation, a number of people there would have helped to superintend those and teach in them, and probably supported them financially as well too.
My name's Joanne Brown-Kerr, and I'm involved with an organisation called Banmain West Community Cluster. We were absolutely delighted to be involved with this project. Banmain West have been involved with quite a few shared history projects in the past and really learnt a lot and really got a lot out of them. So whenever we seen this project, we thought, yes, this is something that we could be involved with. And our volunteers, we have 2 or 3 very passionate volunteers about history, about shared history and researching into different projects. So we knew we had a bit of expertise around the table to look at a couple of different areas. So then I suppose the next thing was looking at what theme we were going to look at through the project. So we decided to look at sense of place, which immediately sprung out to us because we wanted to really see, we wanted to look at 2 villages, Cullywackey and Portnadown, and how things have changed in the past 100 years. So we started off with a few photographs, very interesting photographs actually, of the main streets of Portnadown and Cullywackey. Very interesting just to see how things have drastically changed between then and now. But that took us into a wee bit more depth because we started to look at, one of our volunteers then found a wee bit of information on the local school in Cullywackey, Buick Memorial Primary School. And we started to delve into that wee bit deeper, so we got some information on the pupils and parents' occupation and what they did at school and all sorts of information about that time, which we thought was fascinating actually. So we spoke to a few local people as well about not obviously their experiences 100 years ago, but actually their parents and information had been passed down about their experiences at school. So it was great to hear from some of the local people and also some of the school children as well about their experiences now. So that was great. That was Cullywackey. Then Portnadown, we focused in on the bank, Northern Bank in Portnadown. Lots of history around the bank there. And we looked into that in a wee bit more detail and again kind of looked at how things were then compared with now. And actually the Northern Bank in Portnadown now has just recently opened as a community hub and is run by Portnadown Enterprise Group. So a great project there, and actually quite a bit of the research that we've been looking at will be included in the community hub in the bank, and it gives people a wee bit of history about the building. So that's been really, really good. And I suppose to finish off, what have we got out of it? We've really enjoyed the project. We have gathered lots of information, but this isn't the end of it. We're going to actually carry on and look at schools. We're going to develop that wee bit of research we've started and look a wee bit more at the schools. But I suppose the key thing for us and our volunteers has been, it's a bit of history, it's a bit of heritage, it's having that recorded somewhere, having that in a book or having that on a display so that that's there for future generations to come. So, as I mentioned at the start, delighted to have been involved and hope to continue with the work that we've started.
My name's Linda Hook and I see Larne as my hometown. I've been working in Larne Museum for over 10 years, which I enjoy very much. I've always loved history, and just being in the museum and seeing things that perhaps aren't always on display is very interesting. For some time I've been following the history of my family. I've spent quite a bit of time in Prony and found some very interesting things about the family farm. It came into the family in 1845 and I used to stay there on holiday. It's not very far from Larne, about 3 miles. And whilst I didn't appreciate the old building at the time, now that I've learned its history, it's something that I'm very proud has been in my family. In those days, farmers rented their farms from a landlord. In the case of my great-grandfathers, it was Viscount Dungannon. So for over 100 years, they paid their rent twice a year, and whatever they made apart from that was theirs. In 1903, there was a Land Act in England and Ireland, and it enabled farmers to buy their farms for the first time. It meant that whatever improvements they were doing, they got to keep. They were secure, they couldn't be evicted. So it was something that appealed to most farmers. But in 1919, my great-grandfather could have bought the farm, but he in fact chose not to. I knew that the farm had been bought eventually, so I thought I would look into the records and find out just when it was bought. There's a database based on the Griffith evaluation. Around 1860, a man called Griffith did a survey of Ireland and looked at all the farms and valued them at what the rent should be. So I was able to look at those records and find out that, in fact, my ancestors rented the farm right up until the 1920s. I couldn't find exactly what year that my grandfather bought the farm, but I do know that he didn't have it in 1926 or 1929 when the last records are available. So as he died in 1933, I can just assume that he bought it around about 1932. So that meant that for the first time, my family were working the farm and it was theirs.
I'm Steve Diamond. I'm a historian, artist from Whitehead, and the centenary of Northern Ireland and the collection in Carrickfergus Museum immediately kicks off thousands of stories. So where do you start? And a good place to start is the 1920s, looking back from the 2020s. I mean, here we are today and we're worried about the protocol, Brexit, COVID-19, and it's a shock when you look at the 1920s. You have people dealing with the Spanish flu pandemic, which killed 50 to 100 million. It was far worse. They didn't know what a virus was, let alone a vaccine. They'd just been through World War I, partition. Their problems were enormous. But in the collection here, you have the chain of office of Whitehead Urban District Council, which was a bunch of people who proposed giving the town urban powers and got together and put together a census to prove Whitehead had enough people. And these people had faith in the future and they wanted to build things. You know, they built the swimming pool, they repaired the promenade, which was wrecked by sea storms. They gave us, better roads and housing, affordable housing so that the town could grow. One of the people on the very first Whitehead Town Council has a very interesting name. He's Fidele Bonugli, or he's an Italian immigrant. Back there, apparently, it's called Bonugli. And his story is very astonishing. His mother dies after childbirth, and 5 of the children, he's in his 20s, he brings 4 of his siblings. They go to the coast of Scotland, to Stranraer, as immigrants. You imagine he's just got a suitcase. He ends up in Larne and Whitehead as this very successful landowner, farmer, ice cream salesman. He has shops in Whitehead, and he is the most popular person on that council. He tops the poll with the most votes, and his story is very extraordinary for someone coming from abject poverty as an immigrant to this country.
I'm Adrian Hack. I've always had an interest in events around the Second World War, largely because my mum was a young girl in Eindhoven in Holland during the Second World War and lived under occupation, and often would have shared her stories. But more recently I've been interested in events closer to home in my hometown of Carrickfergus during the same period. And last year, Carrickfergus Museum released a photograph on Facebook, which was basically entitled Women's Volunteers in Carrickfergus During the Second World War. It was a picture of about 80 women, some in uniform, but a lot in sort of civilian clothing, but with badges and armbands on. And I couldn't figure out what it was all about. And that sent me off on a bit of a research mission, where I started looking at websites, I was looking at council minutes, newspaper archives, and the story I uncovered I actually found quite fascinating. Basically, the women in Carrickfergus came together and did a huge amount for the local population, fundraising for the war effort, making clothes for evacuees, making camouflage nets to be used by the military. And they kept themselves busy for the entire duration of the war. And it made me really understand that although events around the Second World War tend to be around Dunkirk and D-Day and the Battle of Britain, that back at home people had to keep calm and carry on. And that's exactly what happened here in Carrickfergus. And the women played a huge part in that. So I'm full of admiration for all those who volunteered in Carrickfergus to step up to the plate at the country's greatest need. And for that reason, I just still think that they were actually the greatest generation.
Hello, I'm Helen Clark, Honorary Secretary of the Carrickfergus District Historical Society. The Society has been working with the Mid and East Antrim Borough Council on their Looking Back to Look Forward programme as part of the NI 100 commemorations. The Society has been working with the Carrickfergus Museum on a project looking at Carrickfergus in the 1970s. As part of the project, we've looked at some home movies, we've used newspapers and TV archives, and also looked at photographs and town guides held by the museum to develop a map of Carrickfergus in the 1970s. Some of the photographs we looked at were of Back Carrick Week. Back Carrick Week was established in the late 1960s based on the I'm Backing Britain campaign and was a highlight of the year. Most people remember Back Carrick Week fondly, from the children's 3-legged race and fancy dress competitions to the fun pet shows, and of course the international kart racing around the Marine Gardens, not to mention the highly contested competitions for piano smashing, pie eating and the raft race, as well as waitress racing and the greasy pool competition. Over the years there has also been a variety show of the good old days style with prizes for costumes of the audience, and also a closely fought football match between UTV and BBC TV presenters. The members of the Society have very much enjoyed working with the museum on this project, and looking back at these photographs have really brought back some very happy memories.